My name is Paul Gerard. Welcome to this webinar on Agile Governance. So today I want to talk about Agile Governance, which basically could be regarded as a bit of an oxymoron, because governance is generally perceived to be a big business, big project kind of concern, and Agile is kind of the opposite. Small, agile, fast-moving. These are kind of contradictions to what we perceive to be the notion of governance in large corporations and government. So let me make a start, and I'll explain where I'm coming from, and hopefully take a view and explain to you where we come from with respect to governance and our background in larger projects and agile projects, and how really governance helps us to tie smaller projects, agile in particular, to larger business and government initiatives. So here's the overview. I want to explain what I believe governance is first, and then refine the definition and give an illustration or an expectation of what I think agile governance actually is. And then look at the prospect of agile projects in a non-agile world. You know, agile projects commissioned by non-agile businesses, bigger, larger organizations. Now, in order to achieve compliance with some governance regime, I think you need a method and technology. So those of you who've heard me speak before will probably know what's coming there, but I want to just put a different slant on some of the messages that we've been putting out for the past couple of years or so. Finally, I want to talk about agile roles, and in particular, given the audience is primarily test-related, I suspect, I'll talk about the roles of developers and BAs, but also testers in a little bit more detail. I could say, to preempt the discussion on how testers fit in, is kind of governance drives the agile test strategy. And the next webinar I run next week will be on agile test strategy. So this talk will flow into the next one. There is commonality with it. I'll summarize and then close, and hopefully have a few questions at the end. So firstly, let me start with what I think governance is. And as usual, one snoops around the internet looking for a good definition. And the best one I found was on Wikipedia, a source I like but never trust, I have to say. And here it is. Governance is the act of governing. Well, so what? And here's the key phrase. It relates to decisions that define expectations, grant power, or verify performance. And those three italicized phrases I will reuse in a moment, because I think they set the scene for project governance and clearly agile governance in general. Now, governance is often a board-level concern. It's the higher-ups, the CEO and his board, who pay attention to governance because they're accountable to stakeholders or government or whoever. But I think that project governance focuses on the capital investments an organization makes. Now, that phrase sounds rather kind of economic or accountant speak, but in effect, a project is an investment of time and effort and resources in order to achieve some business goal. It's an investment. So governance is about assessing whether the investment is being properly managed. So let me ask, why governance? Why would you bother with this, for heaven's sakes? Well, firstly, there's the common sense reason. So if you imagine your own investments, when you invest money in something, you'd want to know how the money was spent if other people are going to spend it on your behalf. If you invest someone else's money, and most company boards and certainly governments spend money on other people's behalf, they are accountable. They have to demonstrate they're doing the right thing, if you like. And the questions are really, is the money used wisely? Is it under control? Are they assessing and addressing risks properly? So that's the common sense argument for it. But there's obviously the probably more familiar compliance aspect of governance. Boards are accountable to national and international law. So all companies, certainly in the UK and I think across the world, companies are accountable to stakeholders, but they are governed by their national and often international laws. They have shareholders they are accountable to. And clearly there are regulators as well. In many industries, banking is the most obvious one that I'll mention in a moment, but regulators set the rules by which organizations must play. And the issue with compliance is there's this notion of comply or explain, and by that is either you follow the rules, you comply with the rules, or you explain why you are not complying. And usually it's easier to comply, but there are cases where you have to explain your way out of these things. So comply or explain is a familiar term for people in this context. Now, is governance just a large project concern? And clearly it sounds like it's something for governments and large corporations. It's not for me. But agile projects are increasingly being incorporated into larger programs of work for bigger businesses and government as well. So if the world is going agile, agile teams are going to find themselves working in partnership with other agile projects perhaps, but also other non-agile projects. And those projects might be in-house teams or offshored or larger outsourced organizations. But the context of every agile project is, it's a bit, the analogy would be a little bit like software in that nowadays there's no such thing as software that is not integrated with something else. In the same way, agile projects more and more are going to find themselves integrated with other projects and larger programs of work. Often these are business programs which have many and varied business goals, risks and stakeholders. So what is governance? Is it just something, a set of boxes to be ticked? I mean, is that all it is, for heaven's sakes? Or is it some preferred behaviors or processes that we must follow? Or is it a way of thinking? What on earth is it? How can we recognize what governance is in our agile team? Because most agile advocates, all the gurus in the agile world, I think hardly any of them speak of governance, and yet corporations are most concerned about governance and how agile fits into their governance regimes. So I think it's an important topic that we have to take into consideration, particularly for larger organizations, but specifically for smaller teams in those larger project contexts. So just to step back a moment is what's the failure of governance? They come in all shapes and sizes. Clearly the banking crisis of the last few years, it's a staggering failure of governance at several levels, both with governments deregulating and perhaps not recognizing the behaviors that their deregulation has caused. The banks and the lenders themselves and the riskiness of their behaviors, again, is a failure of governance at the highest level. The 1986 Challenger disaster, again, this was an aspect of governance, and NASA kind of failed the astronauts and the community, the US community, in that their perception was that public relations was more important than the safety of the pilots in the space shuttle. Very recently in the UK, the BBC proudly announced some years ago the Digital Media Initiative. It was recognised to be in trouble a couple of years ago and supposedly put on track again. But very recently, in the last month, the announcement was made that it's been cancelled. And I think £98 million of British taxpayers' money has been lost on a modern big data project. So although this is a big project, there's no question it's it was a leading edge initiative, but it does appear that the project, perhaps there were failures of government and people at the top. Governance, I should say, rather than government. There are failures of governance at the top of the BBC, and it does sound like perhaps heads will roll there. Now that's all very well talking about these large-scale newsworthy items of failures in large business and government programs, but all projects, maybe almost all projects, you could trace failure of these projects to a lack of control and governance at some level. That's my argument. So even with respect to agile teams in lean startups, there's a notion of governance because the owners of the company have to pay attention to the way the projects that are building their business for them. There's a notion of governance built into their behaviors. They might not call it governance, but the behaviors are there nonetheless. So let me move on to what I'd understand to be agile governance. And let me speak briefly about sort of what I've called the challenge of software and communication in particular. You could summarize the difficulty of building useful, valuable software products of high value, of high quality, with some of these bullets. It's an incredibly hard thing to do to get the knowledge out of stakeholders' heads to understand what they actually need. Then there's the building stuff, the technical challenge of building some software in the context of a business process and other systems perhaps. Then there's the tester's challenge of confirming that the solution does what it should do. And then communicating what it actually does. Again, there's a notion of finding bugs in software, but also demonstrating that the software does what the stakeholders actually require. And then there's the rather sizable challenge of getting people to pay for what you've delivered and to go live with confidence. These things happen, but the confidence with which organizations make decisions to go live, to accept, to pay the bill, to go to court, these are quite a challenge. There are too many communication challenges. I mean, in some ways, software development isn't a technical challenge at all. It's a human and communication challenge. Now, one of the things that Agile has admirably demonstrated over the last 10 years or more is that Agile teams being more compact, being autonomous, they govern their own destiny, and using some relatively simple techniques, make use of feedback in ways that waterfall structured larger scale programs struggle to achieve. So to illustrate this, I want to talk about some of the agile disciplines. So with pair programming, the feedback is almost delivered within seconds. So a programmer may write some code, his partner may say, let's test this. They create the test, they run the test, and the feedback is there in seconds. Test-driven development might give you feedback in moments, minutes. Continuous integration, maybe an hourly build and test process can give you hourly feedback on the state of your project and program. Of course, daily Scrum stand-ups happen daily, and you might have an iteration or a sprint that lasts 2, 3, 4 weeks or so, and then there's an end of phase feedback process, a showcase if you like. Now the wonderful thing about what Agile has done is Agile has demonstrated that these rapid feedback loops don't eliminate human error or bugs or whatever, but they speed up dramatically the pace at which these problems, these difficulties, these challenges, these defects, it speeds up the process of detecting them so that they can be repaired and corrected for, and the direction of the project can be changed to suit. So what Agile has proven is feedback loops, and rapid feedback in particular, is absolutely essential. Now that's great, but one has to say that in the context of a larger program, an Agile team might be very productive, but most of that feedback is internal to the team. Not much comes out of an Agile team. Of course, arrangements can be made, but the principles of Agile treat the team as a self-contained mechanism for delivering useful software. So the challenge to corporates is how do they integrate these productive Agile teams into larger programs of work where the planning and assumptions and scheduling of activities outside the Agile team have dependencies on an Agile team. How can they integrate the feedback of an Agile team into larger programs? So let me revisit the definition of governance. And we had this concept of decision-making with regards to defining expectations, granting power, verifying performance. Now I'm going to use a shorthand to summarize those three aspects of governance into these three things: definition, delegation, and assurance. Definition of need is what you might call setting the expectations and the requirements for a piece of software or business functionality. Delegation is handing the task of delivery of that functionality to a project team, and assurance is commonly regarded as the testing that's performed. But there's a bit more to assurance, but it's about having confidence about the quality of the delivery of the solution. Now, delegation to agile teams is a bit scary for corporates. If you think back to waterfall structured projects, those approaches and processes appear familiar and safer because they can be delegated. We can define a process and say, follow this process, produce this documentation, get me involved at these checkpoints so I can inspect progress and see for myself where we are. So in some ways, waterfall seems safer to corporates because they don't need to trust the resources who implement projects quite so much. But the visibility is very high because of the documentation and the outputs. Now that's what should happen, and of course, waterfall done badly and done badly too often obviously contradicts that notion. But an organization used to waterfall, when you compare it with agile, delegation to an agile team seems much more risky than waterfall because there's a less visibility of what goes on inside those teams, and so therefore there needs to be more trust. So it's kind of, we don't trust the techie with waterfall. We have to invest more trust and get less visibility out of agile teams. That's why it's a bit scary to them. So let me talk a step back now into how agile might operate in a non-agile world. And the challenges of the aspects of agile governance that we need to pay attention to are, I would call, alignment, feedback, and integrity. The alignment is, does an agile team and its behavior align with the business goals? That is, what the team are producing, will it deliver the functionality? Will it achieve the goal of its business that has invested the time and effort and money in the project? Do the team actually understand what those business goals are? Does it understand the business? Are the priorities within the project and the choices to be made within the project, do they align with the priorities of the business that commissioned the project? Are the things of most concern to the business, do these things flow down as risks into our agile project so they pay attention to the concerns of the owning stakeholders? With feedback, the scope of the delivery to be provided by an agile team has to align with the requirements of a larger program as a whole, but there needs to be feedback that the larger program recognizes what will be delivered and how that delivery can be used in the context of the bigger system, the bigger program. Progress towards those goals needs to align with the way that people understand progress to be made in the larger context, in the larger program. And clearly, where there are risks to be addressed, the agile team have to demonstrate that they are paying attention to these risks and implementing the right choices. So some agile governance challenges, these are the kind of questions that a team might ask then and say, well, wait a minute, we've been asked to align with a governance kind of regime, but is the product owner on our team, is he the right person? Does he know the business well enough to communicate to us what is actually required? Do the goals of our project align with this higher level business goal? Can we trust that we are actually in good communication with the wider business concern? How do we demonstrate achievement of the business goal? Does the larger program have a view on the risk? Can we interpret their perceptions and their concerns such that we can behave appropriately to address those risks and concerns? Are we looking at risk at the right level? The risk at the level of the corporate might be so far beyond our capability, and yet we seem to inherit responsibility for it. Are we looking at risk at the right level in our project? This could be a bureaucratic nightmare. I mean, this doesn't sound agile at all. That's the problem with governance, if you like. So let me step back and say, let's look at the any project, agile or otherwise, in context. IT projects typically are instituted on behalf of a business to support the achievement of some larger business goal or initiative, as I would call it. There are stakeholders involved inside and outside your project who might be supportive or actually anti the whole initiative across the piece. But understanding the business context helps you to define and manage the scope of your projects, to design the approach you use, and how you interpret, report, achievement and progress. So I want to talk a little bit about how business programs by and large are managed, or certainly managed well. There might be some business initiative, some bright idea at board level that says, yeah, we're going to invest $100 million to launch a new business, or merge two businesses, or separate two businesses, or move from a distributed business model to a central business model, or the reverse. We have a set of stakeholders who contribute, who will benefit, who will support or possibly oppose this program, and we need to understand their relationships and how we engage with them. There's a set of intermediate as well as a final ultimate goal. We need to understand what those goals are and how we measure achievement. And associated with each of those goals are a series of risks that threaten the achievement of those goals. Now we can set the vision of how we, or the roadmap of how we achieve our ultimate business goal by creating a goal network. The dependencies are simply the highlight the sequences in which we must make those achievements, those goal achievements. And we can associate risks with those goals, and we could represent that graphically. So I've put a simple graphic there. Now in order to achieve that ultimate business goal, we might need some business projects, but also some IT, some software projects. So we need to partition out the goals and risks for subsets of the overall initiative to implement projects that will go out and deliver. So this is how a business program might end up creating multiple projects, some agile, some not so agile, some business, some technological. Now in order to align agile with this vision of how we create larger business programs, and they could be very large or they could be relatively modest but simply broken up into multiple projects, there's no question there needs to be some kind of method, and we would argue you need some technology to help you to support this. The way that the industry is moving and that the corporate world seems to be moving is changing, and the technologies they use today will not deliver the support that is required if a corporate says we are headed down the agile path. Now most of what I'm going to speak about is mentioned in the Business Story Method pocketbook, which you can download, the links there, and I'm going to talk about the technology that we've created to support these ideas. I have to say that the whole notion of definition and assurance are core to the way we do business now and what our vision is for the future of both the services we offer in requirements and testing and the technologies that we're creating. Now let's step back again and look at what agile teams do. To create visibility, they use story and task boards, and you could call these low-tech dashboards. And there are many shared intranet-based and software as a service tools now which support story, task management, requirements management too. But they don't usually integrate very well with corporate plans, requirements or dashboards. So we need tools that achieve the traceability and visibility and are usable, but they need to integrate with other projects that might be agile, structured, offshored, outsourced, whatever, and the program as a whole. Now you could argue that actually the application lifecycle management tools that are out there support the corporate vision of large programs, but they don't support Agile. So we need a lightweight ALM. So I'm going to show some screenshots just to illustrate the thoughts that I'm trying to put into your minds as to how the technology and a method would support the way that compliance with a governance regime could be achieved in Agile teams. Now, at the program level, a goal and risk network might look something like the picture I've shown you. Here you have a network of goals, and they're the shapes, the ovals with the green borders, and the risks are the octagons with red borders. And the relationships you can see quite clearly. It moves from lower level goals and risks at the bottom of the diagram through to the ultimate goal at the top. I've printed it from bottom to top just to fit it on the page. Normally you'd do it left to right. And you can see that goals and risks each have statuses that give you a visual indication of progress towards your ultimate goal. So the goal and risk network is central to the definition of larger business programs. Now, the definition of the need, our argument is that you still need requirements. Now, those requirements might be very detailed textual descriptions of business rules, or they might be placeholders for the understanding of what the need is. But the requirement is critical to identifying the functionality that needs to be delivered to meet a business goal. Now, once we're into the Agile team, they will tend to work on the basis of stories and features. And a feature might be a component or a capability within a software system. But those features are illustrated by example and scenarios. So our strong recommendation and the way that the developer community is moving is they are basing more and more of their behaviors on test-driven, behavior-driven, specification by example, acceptance test-driven, these disciplines, and they are all based on specification by example. So we identify features, we identify scenarios which example a feature's behavior in use. And there might be data associated with each scenario to be data-driven. We've called that, the scope of that, a business story, because it's more than a yellow sticky on a whiteboard. It's a manifestation of a set of requirements that are targeted at delivering functionality to meet a business goal. Now, we could create a hierarchy of requirements, and I'm going to go through this slide very, very quickly. We can create a hierarchy of requirements in the traditional way, but beneath that requirement, we might create and identify features, and you can see that indicated, and beneath a feature, we have a scenario. So there's a hierarchy of requirement to requirement, and then requirement to features, to scenarios, and potentially test cases, scenario data, if you like. Now that hierarchy is all very well, but one of the values of creating examples, and those examples to be then used for developer test automation and potentially system and acceptance test automation, is those examples can also be used to feedback knowledge to the authors of the requirement in the first place. I've mentioned before there's a simple method we've called defo spam, which is a validation of requirements using stories. I'm not going to talk about that today, but give it a Google and take a look. But the principle is that we use the examples to validate requirements. Now, one of the real shortcomings in most of the requirements management methods and tools out there is this notion of a dictionary. We are, like the Americans and the British, separated by a common language. In the same way, users and stakeholders are separated from developers using a common set of requirements, and the perception of the meaning of the content of those requirements is not always common to the two groups, let alone the testers and the BAs who wrote them. So a dictionary and the use of language and the use of an index of the language used in our requirements, our stories, our tests, our code. I think this is the way forward for achieving this concept of ubiquitous language. So 50 years ago, COBOL was promoted as the way of allowing accountants to write their own software. It never happened. But the concept was this idea of ubiquitous language. Well, I think the requirements tools and the mechanism of exampling requirements through stories suddenly provides us with the ability to do this indexing and analysis by the building blocks of our own language. So the use of all the words in our glossary can be referenced to requirements and scenarios and tests. And this is kind of, I think, one of the ways that we can look at new ways of doing, for example, test coverage through business concepts and impact analysis, again, through tracing the use of business concepts through our requirements, our stories and our tests. We've set the architecture for the product we created, test tools, because agile software development is dominated by test automation. And I'm just showing these pictures just to show you that this has been thought through. These are lifted from the webinar I did some weeks ago on how to eliminate feature-based checking. The feedback loop from the business goal network through to requirements, through stories, the test automation, we can feedback and show coverage against business goals and risks at the highest level. We're pretty certain that's the future of ALM tools and potentially test automation in the future. Okay, so that's enough of the technology, but let's get back to, well, how does it impact the people on our projects? Let's just look at the various roles in Agile teams and how they contribute to governance. Now, the product owner, you could say, is the governor, and kind of semi-jokingly, that's what they are. They are accountable to the business, and they are responsible for ensuring the alignment of their projects, their Agile projects, with the larger business initiatives. They are the channel, if you like, to their own business peers and to program management who are overseeing the overall business initiative. So they're accountable for the requirements that drive the project backlog. They prioritize and help to scope the work. They're responsible for the risks and accountable for the risks. And by and large, they report progress to business. And progress is not just about delivery, it's about achievement. Much more than just getting software working, it has to be, can this software achieve or support a business goal? We need to get into a much better, no, I hesitate to say that, a much more focused way of delivering progress information. It has to be more aligned with business goals and achievement and much less about test cases and defects. Now, I've summarized the three amigos on one slide. So the three amigos are the BA, the developer, the tester. The BA does what BAs do. They liaise and manage stakeholders and their needs and are most usually responsible for capturing the requirements knowledge, looking for the patterns and channeling it into the project so it becomes implementable. Now, this might be at the requirements level, but it might also be the stories and scenarios level. The developer clearly does all the technical work. They assist with the scoping of the stories, and clearly they are best placed to identify the scope of individual features, but they design, build, test, and deliver functionality through features. Now, the tester, probably in the context of a governance consideration, has the most interesting job. So the tester just does two things in the main. They challenge the thinking on the project. They are almost like the awkward person in the corner. And I would argue that they do assurance in the small. So assurance is really the how a project demonstrates that it has addressed risks and is achieving what it has been tasked with. Let's look a little bit more at what the tester does. Now, the tester asks endless questions, persistently, endlessly. They can be a pain, but their role really is to continuously challenge the thinking, assumptions, the agreements, and maybe the testing that's being performed in the context of the project. So the tester isn't just there to run some manual tests at the end. The role of the tester is to test the thinking, assertions, assumptions, agreements, and so on. So they will ask questions like, do we really understand this requirement? Is it well enough defined to estimate, to develop, and test? Can we trust the requirement? Do we know enough to actually get the developer to build some code that we know or we believe will meet the needs of our stakeholders? What testing what testing are the developers able to do, and what testing will they do? Will it support the notion of overall assurance and deliver a regression safety net? What system user acceptance testing will be done? So the tester might help to specify tests and might help to run tests, but by and large the tester is there to step back and focus on product risks and to look at what might be being missed, whether it's holes in the thinking, holes in the software, and aspects of quality that the software may not meet. Now, the testing of one form or another ultimately exists to provide evidence of achievement. If it either provides evidence of achievement or exposes failures which can be investigated, and maybe there's some defects to be corrected there. But the testing is there to demonstrate that progress is being made more than anything else. So the testing focuses on requirements validation through example. So before the software is written, do we know what we are doing? Feature acceptance and regression, the notion of the developer creating software that has value and is acceptable, and basing that on a regression platform that provides a safety net for change. And the stories and the examples that are created to validate requirements are reused to demonstrate that those requirements are met. So stories, scenarios can be used manually or in an automated way to demonstrate that business goals are being met. So the tester might do some testing and might do a lot of testing, but they also have a role as a coach, a testing coach. We coined the term test master some years ago. It's like that they are part coach, part advisor, part policeman, part tester. They do a bit of everything. Now the scope of that and what the testers do will be the basis of the Agile Test Strategy webinar I'll run next week. To summarize, I want to say this, that governance is crucial to stakeholders who commission, fund and benefit from your project. Now, the people who commit hundreds of millions of dollars or euros to implement large business initiatives depend critically on software projects to support those business initiatives. So at the board level, they must perform good governance. Now, to be dependent on agile teams, those agile teams must provide visibility of their definition and assurance processes. And it seems to me that the way that we've structured the thinking around stories and requirements, integration with automation, and the way the tester acts as a local assurance expert, if you like, the test master, I think agile teams have to work that way in order to align with the governance requirements of larger programs. Now, the challenge that agile teams really have is that they have to earn the trust of their stakeholders and deliver reliably against project goals. Now, the difficulty here is that a lot of the agile discipline is geared towards demonstrating, putting value and quality ahead of quantity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what corporates need to figure out in their agile teams and agile groups is how these agile teams can make promises of delivery at certain dates while still adopting agile disciplines. Now, when it comes to the technology and methods, it seems to me that the technologies and methods that have supported corporates over the years in their waterfall projects are simply not going to work when agile teams are in place. Yes, they might be able to tweak some technology or some processes, but this concept of application lifecycle management, I really think that's due for a change. So our argument with the technologies we're creating is we've started with agile teams as the basis of application lifecycle management rather than a peripheral, tail on the larger waterfall dog, if you like. So the new ALM, we would argue, has to provide traceable scope, story, test, and task management as part of its functionality. They have to integrate with corporate goal and risk networks, with corporate requirements and corporate plans. So that's it for Agile Governance, and I'm just going to take a peek at the monitor here and see what questions we've got. So I've got one or two prepared, but I'm hopeful there'll be some in the list here. First obvious one, will a slide deck be available after the webinar? What we will do is we're recording the webinar, and we'll put a video on Vimeo, and we'll send you a link in the next 24 or maybe 48 hours, so you'll have that. If you're interested in the slides themselves, just drop me a line and I'll send them through. Okay, so one question that cropped up was this notion of integrity. I mentioned it but didn't really talk about it. Really that relates to the decision making within the team. So the example I think I would use would be the space shuttle and the NASA experience with the O-rings, where the engineers quite clearly discussed, were concerned about, experimented with, and had data on the performance of the O-rings, which ultimately failed and caused the shuttle disaster. But the perception of the supplier was that they had to align with a launch schedule which was imposed upon them. And in effect, because of technical challenges, the shuttle was being launched far fewer times than NASA had promised the government. So the priority seemed to be that launch on time was more important than the safety of the mission. And the engineers and the managers of the engineers chose to massage the data in some respects in order to demonstrate compliance with the overall mission of launching more often. So what does this come down to integrity? It's like if the project team at the end of the day have to make the call on what the priorities are and recognize that some priorities and goals of business are actually in conflict. So the highest level of quality and the lowest cost are usually in conflict. So governance doesn't give you an excuse to simply say, well, we'll just deliver slowly at the highest quality, or we'll deliver quickly at the lowest quality. You have to be professional and challenge the requirements and behave in what I would say is a professional way. So the project is still accountable for doing the right thing, and I think that's what I mean by integrity. A governance regime doesn't guarantee that. That's part, and that's what was showed by by many projects, many larger projects that have failed. Governance regimes are in place, but people either haven't followed them or have just turned a blind eye to some aspects in favor of others. There's a question on how does I've talked mostly about Agile in the context of corporate or larger organizations. What happens if you're a startup? Surely this idea of governance is a wee bit over the top. Isn't it too big a burden to carry? I think at face value, I think that's true. But if you think about it, the company owners who will have a stake in their company, and they may have had an injection of cash from perhaps a venture capital organization, the venture capital company certainly will be interested in good governance because their cash is being used to invest in the development of a company to make money, and they will look for a return on their investment so they can walk away and invest in another startup. So it's quite common for venture capital organizations to put people on the boards of directors of startup companies, and may even provide expertise specifically required. So the concept of governance in a small startup, even a three-man company, is always there because someone's money is at stake, and the way in which that money is spent could be needs to be monitored and assured in some way that the right things are being done, that the truth is being told. So I think even in a startup, the concept of governance it applies. Now, whether you need a bureaucratic system to manage it, maybe not. Maybe it can be done as simply as making a list of the goals and the list of stories that you need to build, and with one eye on a list of things that go wrong, your risk register. Maybe it's as simple as that. I think that is the level of sophistication of the thinking of most agile advocates. They don't go beyond that. Now, what corporates are finding is that that is not sufficient for them to trust agile teams. So what is happening at the moment, I think, in corporates is agile teams are having to adopt a kind of a hybrid approach where they do some agile stuff, but they also have to do weekly reporting and the boring and mundane stuff, because the corporate cannot deal with a less comprehensive feedback loop from agile team into their projects and programs. Question about the tool. So the tool very quickly is businessstory-manager.com. That's one word. The other one is called sp.qa, Story Platform for QA. So sp.qa is the URL of a subset of the Business Story Manager functionality. It's completely free. It's limited to 100 stories, but beyond that it has most of the capabilities of the analysis module and some of the test features of the full product. So it's there for evaluation, but you might find it useful in a small team. Okay, I think there's a couple of other questions, but I think they're probably not answerable right now. I'll have a think about those. So I think I'll close now. So thank you very much for your attention. As usual, I've overrun a few minutes. I apologize for that. But I need to show you one more slide, which is the date of the next webinar. We're running one on Agile Test Strategy next Tuesday, same time, same place, 25th of June, 2 p.m. And the Agile Test Strategy will expand on the ideas of what the role of the tester is within an Agile team. Thanks for listening, and perhaps I'll see you next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.